All right, that looks great on my end here. All
Okay.
right, Erin, take it away.
Thank you. I'm just gonna move some of these Zoom gizmos out of the way. So thanks for the introduction. Like I said, I'm hoping to talk for maybe like 20, 25 minutes, but we can also pause the presentation, have an early discussion. So I consider myself an environmental social scientist. And so for the work I'm presenting today, it's really part of my dissertation work that relied a lot on sociology concepts and ideas from what's called ecofeminist theory. So I'll kind of explain a little bit more about what those are in a minute, but here, let me find my button. So that's my contact information if you wanted to, for any reason, like reach out with questions afterwards. Most of you all know how to reach me, those of you that I know. So I'm gonna get started by just kind of sharing some headlines. So we're seeing a lot of headlines over the last few years about women getting into fishing. It's kind of a feel-good story, I think, for news outlets, and it's interesting, it's intriguing, and really behind stories like this is a lot of research and trying to understand women's motivations for fishing, what they get out of fishing as an outdoor recreation pastime. So I'll highlight a couple news things that you might want to refer to later, just because they're also like, this is a 3-minute listen. It's a nice story from Michigan. So I'm also going to pause and let you read this wonderful quote. I'm going to give, I guess, about 30 seconds or so for you to read this. So maybe about 5 more seconds to finish reading. So I'll be sharing stories like this and images from women who fish, mainly women living in Michigan that I worked with for my research. And I thought starting with frankly, what I think is a really powerful quote about fishing is a really nice starting point to just think about something we might think as a casual pastime, but just to start to understand the meaning that people can make from fishing. So we'll return to more stories and images like this. And for reference, I'm guessing no one's going to be like really excited about finding the original article that this work's coming from, but this is work that's published in an academic journal. It's behind a paywall right now, but if you wanted a free digital copy, I'm happy to share. Basically, just really wanted to mention that the premise of this work is that women are a minority among recreational anglers, and they're also either underrepresented or misrepresented in both popular culture, like fishing magazines and other fishing reference texts, and also understudied in the academic research realm. So this work is really premised by this sort of like, we just simply need baseline information if we want to understand women's fishing experiences and how they might be related to gender. So a little bit of a spoiler alert, I'm just going to have 3 quick points. And if you don't remember anything else, I hope you remember these 3 things. The first is that gender is not the same concept as sex, and I'll go into the kind of definitions and nuances in a minute. The second is that gender shapes our outdoor experiences, and here I'm referring to gender norms and expectations and gender identities. And the third point that I hope to make is that fishing as a recreation, as an outdoor recreation pastime, can both reinforce and break down gender norms. And this is true for both men and women. I just happen to be more interested in women's experiences, so that's what I'll focus on today. But it's certainly true that gender norms impact men and all genders. So this is sort of my sex and gender 101 lesson, just this slide and the next. So just to remind us that sex is a biological concept based on our biology and physiology. It's even a legal determination assigned at birth. And the terminology we use for sex is male, female, or intersex. So this is really different from gender. Gender is what we say in academic research, socially constructed, which means that through our culture and social interactions, we've kind of created these well-recognized ideas of what is masculine and feminine. So gender can be, and gender has many components, so it can be an identity, so how we are self-identifying our own gender. For instance, I identify as a woman. It can also be gender expression, so how we outwardly express gender, and that can vary moment to moment, day to day. There's lots of different ways to express gender. And also gender attributions, which is really referring to how other people might see you or presume to see gender coming out in another person. So when you kind of consider that definition, what gender and environment studies focus on is how gender norms and expectations related to gender kind of mediate how we mediate how we interact with the environment. So that's kind of the sex and gender lesson for the day. And I'm not going to talk about the genderbread person. I just think this is a really fun resource. I got this from the SafeZoneProject.com. If you just are interested in these concepts and kind of digging in more deeply, I recommend going through some of these exercises because I think it's worthwhile exercise for everybody. So now we're going to talk more about recreational fishing in a gender context. So we know that men who belong to the baby boomer generation fish at higher rates than other generations, and men fish more than women. And this certainly is related to gender. So this poster is from the 1950s, and this is showing you already that there are really strong gender norms and expectations present when Michigan was advertising itself as a water wonderland vacation. So if you look at the gender roles that are being kind of on display in this poster, you see the man in the photo has a fishing pole tackle box. The looks, he's got a fishing vest on, the hat, he's got flies on his hat, definitely like ready for fishing. If you look at the woman in the image, she might be an athlete, she's got a tennis racket, but doesn't look like, she'll be going fishing. So these are just some signs of generational gender norms. And like I said, we know women are underrepresented among recreational anglers. This is using fishing license data to show that. So in states like Wisconsin and Michigan, only about 1 in 5 license holders are women. In Minnesota, it's actually about 1 in 3 are women. So they're still underrepresented, but there's something going on in Minnesota, which is interesting. Maybe we can talk about that. Have some ideas, but are not quite sure why. So this is just to show you that women are still continue to be underrepresented, even though we might think, okay, it's not the 1950s anymore. Like what are the norms that are holding women back? We are seeing increased participation rates in women though. So this is a map created using licensed sales data, showing you across several Great Lakes states. Everywhere in green is where women's fishing participation rate increased, and it's at the county level. That's why it's kind of blocked off into chunks. So especially in Michigan and Wisconsin and some parts of Minnesota, we're seeing increases in women's fishing participation. And again, we're seeing this in the news. So this is from a couple years ago, showing how social groups like women anglers in Minnesota are growing, even though overall license sales are declining. And if you think about that, well, why might that be? You think about that baby boomer generation I mentioned, where they're fishing at higher rates than any other generation. Unfortunately, that generation is also aging. And they're aging out of the sport of fishing. And there isn't necessarily another generation that's kind of picking up that decline in fishing sales. So kind of keeping along that similar vein, we've shown through some demographic work that I did that women born since 1985 or even after 1990 are more likely to fish than older generations. So we're seeing generational change. And I love to put these images side by side. This is on the right, a Trout Unlimited magazine cover from fall of, I think, 2018. It's kind of blurry. Very different image than the one on the left, right? And these definitely weren't produced for the same reasons, but you can just kind of see how this might be, the image on the right could be more inspirational or serve as like a role model than the one on the left to a young woman. So coming back to the study that I wanted to summarize, this is kind of like the details you might not want to know, but really quickly, I had two groups of women that I worked with in two parts of Michigan in the Upper Peninsula and Metro Detroit between the ages of 20 and 62. And we used this combined photography and storytelling method called Photovoice so that they could share their firsthand fishing experiences. Because I really wanted to know what fishing means to them, how is gender impacting their fishing behavior and decisions. And I'll just say really quickly that this feminist participatory method, it's called that because it's meant to bring to light women's experiences that maybe haven't been studied before. Often there's an assumption that if we need to understand women, our starting point is comparing them to men. But this method kind of argues that like you just need to understand women like on their own first. Don't start by comparing them. You know, so like don't assume that like men are the default kind of thing. So I'm not going to go through all of these steps, so I just wanted to highlight a couple. This is a kind of an intensive process to do Photovoice. It took about a year between the two groups and some travel back and forth because I was living in the UP and working with the Detroit group. But at the initial meeting, once you recruit participants, you're kind of giving them an open-ended question like, what does fishing mean to you? And how would you like the next few months to go in this project? I basically said, you know, I've got a budget for this work. I want to help you. I'm interested in why women like to fish, but that's kind of it. I didn't like present them with a research question like, how does gender impact your fishing experiences? So it's a little bit awkward at the first meeting. They're kind of like, what do you want us to do? But like, as soon as they start kind of talking about fishing and sharing stories, there's a lot of laughter and like nodding in agreement and light bulbs going off. So they basically decide what ideas they want to pursue in the documentation stage, which is them going out and taking pictures while they're fishing, or in some instances, collecting pictures they'd already taken. And then they come back together and do photo walks, which is where I would go to the room early, get their pictures in advance, tape them to the wall, and then each individual would have ample time to talk through each of their images and tell the other women the stories behind them. And then they all have questions for time to ask each other questions and discuss. And then there's some reflection. This top right image says what stories are missing. In these meetings, the first photo walk, we're also kind of trying to make a list of like what's missing, what might they want to go back out and document. So there's some kind of going back and documenting, coming back to the group discussion. So then through group brainstorms and discussions, they decide what they want to do at the end of the project. Do they want to just build a photo book for themselves? Would they like to do a group presentation? And each group did something entirely different. So this is an example of what the Upper Peninsula group did. I think there were about 7 women in that group. They decided to have a museum photography exhibit. And this group is really, I don't want to say special, but they had a unique set of skills. So one was a graphic designer, also an angler, so designed this poster for us. Another was an art professor, so was telling us where to pin up the photos and what went with what. But they decided to present their images in thematically. So instead of clumping them by individual, they clumped by shared themes, which was really cool. And it was up for a couple months. They had an opening exhibit where the public was invited. And so that's what that group did. On the left here, you'll see what one of the Metro Detroit group participants presenting to an angler association that called the Metro West Steelheaders Association. And as you can see in the image, most of the members are older men, which kind of makes sense of that baby boomer trend. And the three women here and one's presenting were sharing their fishing stories with the club for their monthly meeting. So that was a really cool exchange. And then there was a lot of like casual chatting and snacks and just like kind of general hanging out and talking about fishing. So some themes that came from this, I'll share really quickly 3 themes. One was discovering untold stories. So this process is really, as I said, it's kind of intensive. It's a big commitment, and they were just volunteering their time. But through participating, one participant found out that her great aunt, who she was close to, was an angler and had never known that. So this is Denise sharing this story, and she took this picture with her aunt during the project, that she found out her aunt was a fishing fanatic in her early life. And she shared a wonderful story about fishing, and she had a bear that was following her. And these are my initials. I asked, so you just heard that story? And she said, yeah, that was kind of cool. It's totally from this project. I would have never even known. We never spoke about it before. And this is sort of comes back to like women aren't often like portrayed in pop culture as anglers. And I think that certainly relates to how we're just even in our own daily lives talking about this and acknowledging each other. So I think it was really powerful that this was able to happen in their family. Oh. And here's another one, kind of thinking about that generational differences. It's not quite fits in that theme, but it's hard to fit them all in a box. This is a quote from one of the older participants in her 60s who had met 2 younger participants who were also going into fisheries biology. So not only were they recreational anglers, they're kind of making a career out of their interest in fisheries. And this older participant was saying, when I was your age, there were no women in that line of work. So I ended up being a hairdresser, which is fine, but I don't get outside much. And then I love this. She said, I do have a gone fishing sign though. I put it on my mirror when I'm out fishing. She's talking about her hairdressing mirror. So it's kind of bittersweet to see this generational differences, even in careers that you could pursue through an outdoor recreation pastime that you love. So the second main theme was overcoming gendered expectations. So time and time again, I heard some variation of the quote that I'm the token woman, or I'm often the only woman, and some even variation of it was terrible being the only woman there. So I'll share a more detailed quote from one of the participants who said, even though, as shown in this picture, her and her grandma had been fishing her whole life, her grandma's sort of like her fishing idol. When she was working at a job where her boss invited her to go fishing, she said it was terrible being the only woman there. Everybody looks at you like this girl doesn't know what she's talking about, doesn't know what she's doing. And then they finally heard what I had to say, and now I'm the first board member that's a female. So I guess they took a liking to me. So this is her, she's actually a board member of a different fishing association. And the very first and also the youngest, I should say, to be a woman. So that was really powerful. And then even though there's a lot of pictures like the one on the right, people holding out fish, holding it a special way so it looks way bigger than it really is. Finding meaning and connection just being outside and on the water was a big theme that came out of these discussions and photo stories. So I'll give you a minute just to kind of read these a little bit. Maybe like 5 more seconds to read these. So it's always hard when you present this kind of thing to choose the quotes you want to share because there's so many rich, thoughtful stories. But these are selected really to show you that that idea of sometimes fishing might on the surface level feel like oh yeah, I go fishing, but it was interesting to see the women kind of work through in their own minds and through discussion, like, yeah, why do I fish? Like, what is it really about? And often those conversations kind of led to these themes of just wanting to be near the water, smelling it, hearing it, listening to the birds, the loons. And so they kind of got to that place, that realization through talking with each other, which was kind of exciting to observe. So just a couple of reflections. These are my last two slides. Gender norms shift really slowly over generations, and this is probably not news to most of you, but for me, it really was. I was new to understanding gender and how it kind of operates in our daily lives, and I think it's just kind of surprising how long gender norms can kind of stick with us throughout our lives, and it really does affect us in the long term. And then this one is one I think is particularly interesting when we think about on the surface level, you might think, oh, they're out fishing, they're not bothered by gender, or they're really skilled, talented anglers. They don't have any constraints. But really the biggest point I learned was that even the most avid, experienced anglers have to deal with these gendered social constraints. You have to be quite determined to kind of work through them. And not everybody's experience is different, but the most pointed example I can think of is one of the Metro Detroit participants shared that she really wanted to get into fishing. She didn't have a mentor or role model. So she decided to, what do? You join a club. She joined an angler club and tried to befriend some of the members so that she could go out fishing on the boat with them. And they point blank said, like, we don't take women on the boat because there's nowhere for women to go to the bathroom. So she was obviously deflated, but she didn't give up. She didn't leave the sport. I think that would have turned me off for life. She decided to find a different club that was more accepting of women. And she, I think, ended up getting in a fly fishing club because of that. So just another example. And then, of course, as a social scientist, I'm always harping on this, kind of my soapbox, but more integration of social sciences, environmental sociology concepts, and wildlife management and outdoor recreation, especially when it's related to wildlife, I think is really important. And then I'm really interested in the discussion section because I think we could apply this to other underrepresented recreation stakeholders and participants. So when you start kind of uncovering these almost like invisible social norms, it's really, really helpful. And I think this doesn't obviously just apply to women. So I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts on that. But I just put this as a discussion question. We don't have to go with this, but I thought I would ask you all, how are your outdoor experiences impacted by gender? So that's all I had prepared for a talk.
So, well, thank you very much. Yeah, so feel free to jump in and give a shot at answering the discussion question that that's posed here, or sharing any thoughts or whatever you'd like to do here.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody, but I can reshare if I need to.
Switch back into
I was just going to share that when I learned to fish from my grandfather, and I honestly don't remember any like being treated differently from my brother, or any like obvious like you cast like a girl, or like there was no like, I haven't had personally many like I guess negative gender related experiences, but I do know just in the day-to-day life, like I feel pretty intimidated to walk into like a bait and tackle shop, and I think this is where we can all relate to that. Like if you walk into a Cabela's or something, you're like, oh, I gotta talk to like the gear guy. Oh, I see a question. Any intent to try a group with Red Cliff, Bad River, or La Coudray? No, I'm not currently doing this work because I don't have like in my day job, I don't get to do this work, but I do think that that's a really great idea, and you'd probably get very you'd probably get different results, right? I didn't really explain that if you're not familiar with the social sciences, we can do really big data studies. Like I had millions and millions of fishing license data points, and you can draw like really clear conclusions from that. You can say like, yes, we see this trend over time. With these smaller group Photovoice projects, there's definitely still takeaways. It's a little different though. You cannot generalize to like say all women, but you can generalize to gender theory ideas. So it's a little confusing, and I don't know if that's helpful at all, but just something to think about, that like I can't say, oh, because this was this woman's experience, this is all women's experiences, but it can still help me build on those gender theory ideas. Oh, Kelsey asking about if you know of any similar research happening with women who hunt. There are some studies with women who hunt. I don't know of anybody that's used Photovoice exactly, but there have been some, because I remember I looked them up, like scoured all of the different hunting and fishing and women's leisure references I could find. Yeah, I will say though that it's there's not much out there. Like I said, it's why I ended up publishing in a journal called Leisure Sciences, is because people who have been studying leisure, not necessarily like outdoor recreation or wildlife-based recreation, have been thinking about women and how gender impacts our ability to recreate or have leisure time, because maybe you're taking care of your family or whatever. So that research has been happening for decades. Decades. Yeah, and but in the hunting and fishing world, it's actually a pretty new field of study, relatively new, but it's of interest because those numbers are going up, right? More women are fishing, more women are hunting, and even though there's overall declines, and so a lot of state agencies that depend on hunting and fishing license sales to manage wildlife are really, they're really interested in like women's motivations for hunting and fishing. Kara, do you have any future plans to further your research or any new research ideas on your mind? Another project that I'm trying to wrap up, it's really hard to like write papers on the side and do things when you have a full-time job, but I did another study about the Becoming an Outdoors Woman program, which is basically a weekend or day away for women only to learn different outdoor skills in a women only, like really supportive environment. And I interviewed people who run those programs in Canada and different US states. And so I really want to work up those interviews and write something up and bring it back to the folks I interviewed so they can use it in their positions. Because that organizational, like how organizations are gendered, often they don't value women as stakeholders. And that's a really like gutsy big statement, but like a women's only program can actually be controversial in some places. People are like, well, why would we have a program just for women? But social support is really important for outdoor recreation, like getting into it, sustaining it, sticking with it.
Erin, I have a comment for you.
Yeah.
First, again, congratulations on your research. You know,
Thanks,
you and I
Sarah.
have been sharing a lot. And this is a great research and it's gaining a lot of attention, and it should, because research like yours, it should have a broader impact than, it should be extended. It will hopefully, organizations or the government or others will extend this type of research. And one of your contribution to the research is like something that you and I have discussed a lot, that sometimes the perception about outdoor activities is that they are not gender, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody can go, everybody can do fishing, hunting, tourism, ecotourism in my case, right? But we are finding more and more, not only in the numbers, right? As you said, they are not only on the trends, we're finding on the people who are actually doing these outdoor recreation activities that they are gender. And gender has a significant impact on the way men, women, and other genders use outdoor recreation. So thank you for this wonderful research. We should continue talking and sharing, Dr. Burkett.
You're the best. Thank you. Yeah, good comments. I think it's sort of like lifting a veil, right? Like once you start thinking about these issues and thinking about gender, you start to see it and notice it in your everyday life. And I think, yeah, your point that like it's kind of assumed like, well, it's out there, like what's stopping you? And I think that really was brought home, like I said, for me, when it's like these women who are essentially experts. Like there was one who had a woman's only crew in multiple fishing tournaments in the Detroit River, and that's a really big deal, or in Lake Erie. And you know, that takes a lot of skill to like run the boat, run the lines, have your crew, bring in the haul. Like it's exhausting, it's a lot, it's technical, it's kind of an art to it, and yet they're still they're persisting still through so many different sort of challenges related to being the token women, or like the one crew of women in that tournament. Yeah.
Hey there, Erin. I'm gonna actually give you a face to talk to because I know how this can
yay!
be
A face. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. But thank you so much for this fascinating presentation and for delving into this area of research. I agree with Dr. Morgan that you know, it's something that has been, you know, understudied. I'm like just kind of getting into the world of qualitative research and social sciences, coming from a background of quantitative lab-based science. So I find all of this fascinating, your project and the use of Photovoice and everything. And I love how it really kind of coalesces around values, and it like is value added for the participants as well. You know, like they get an opportunity to reflect and really think about, you know, what this activity means to them. And so I have to, I guess I'm that person who's like, oh, I'm going to take your research and take it into my areas of interest and ask you questions that maybe you haven't prepared for. So
no, let's do it. This is great.
But I do a lot of work, you know, thinking about environmental health and kind of environmental advocacy and things like that. And I feel like there's, you know, especially in this Midwest region, such a strong connection that people do feel to natural areas to get out and do outdoor recreation. And yet those people wouldn't really consider themselves environmentalists or people who weigh in on environmental issues. And so I wonder if you have any thoughts or insights on how to, you know, leverage maybe projects like this or other things to just kind of, you know, help people to reflect on their connection to the natural world and then reflect on kind of that conservation ethic and think about ways that we can maybe, you know, just kind of move things forward in that direction when it comes to like protecting water, you know, water quality, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, so this is a really great question. Photovoice actually originated in public health field, which is really great. Some of the earliest references I think I've seen are from public health, working with maybe folks who have different, I don't know, like maybe you have a health condition, it's sort of documenting your daily life and maybe associated challenges or celebrations, what have you. So there's it's been used in a lot of different contexts, and I think what you're describing is like such a great fit for Photovoice. It's really easy to be like, oh, Photovoice that, but I really do think that what you're describing seems like a good fit because like maybe we're just saying the same thing back and forth, but it really kind of forces a little bit of a pause on people to like have that extra reflection. And I will say though, it can sometimes be a little challenging for some individuals. So there was one participant, I'll just share her kind of story, who really struggled writing the stories for the pictures. I shouldn't say struggle, but was like expressed to us, the researchers, like these are almost like, it's almost like too personal to write down. Like the picture's enough for me. So like her pictures that were in the exhibit didn't really have captions. They may have had titles, but they didn't have like the full captions and stories like the others. And so I think it's not gonna work for everybody, but I think, yeah, having that group dynamic is the helpful part because it pulls out, because there are also other people who are like, I don't have anything, like, yeah, I'll bring in some pictures, and then by the end of it, they have like long, beautiful stories and maybe even like multiple pictures and like, oh, this is a series, like they're getting really into it. So I think that would be a really cool way to use it. It would just be a matter of like, what's the question you're framing? I mean, when I started, it was just like, what does phishing mean to you? Like, you're trying to keep it open as a researcher. It's kind of a balance because you're trying to have it come from the participants, but that's not to say you couldn't adjust it and give people more specific questions and ask them to explore through photography. I mean, it can be adjusted for or tailored for your situation. I think that's kind of the beauty of it. The author whose book I used a lot, her name is Amanda Latz, and she wrote a Photovoice book that's a really helpful guide. And I believe she works at a community college, and she'll do like a Photovoice project every semester with her students. I like fangirl follow her on Twitter, but she'll like just like incorporate them into her classes. And I think that's really cool. Like, you can do it in short spurts, like give people disposable cameras. If they'll be like, what is this? I don't know what those are, but you could give them a disposable camera and be like, you have, a week to document X or whatever. Lots of variations.
Yeah, I love that. That's like so much food for thought for me and projects that I'm interested in. So
yeah, I really recommend the Amanda Latz book. It's LATZ, because it's just, there's lots of resources, but her book is, it's thin, it's digestible. It explains like the sort of theoretical foundations of Photovoice, but it's very practical. It may even be called like a practical guide to Photovoice or something like that. Yeah. Oh, I saw Marie had a question. Oh, sorry, Brenna.
Oh, yep. No, I think that's it. I do have like more to say and questions, but I do not want to
I'll put my email in the chat too, because I love talking about Photovoice, obviously,
yeah.
if you ever want to, or phishing and other things. Here we go. I'll put that there. Awesome. Marie, your numbers came from recreational licenses. Those who only use tribal harvesting cards and treaty rights wouldn't be captured. Do you have suggestions for colleagues interested in exploring this in other communities? Yeah, so that's the demographic work that I did using phishing license sales. That's a big omission, is that folks, if you're using a tribal harvesting card and you haven't gone out and also purchased a state level license, which I'm assuming if you don't have to, why would you do that? You're missing from the demographic data. So the trends within tribal communities could be different demographically, and I don't know, because I think gender roles are determined by our cultures, right? And different cultures could have different roles for women, and so I don't know, I could see the gender norms being different, and those generational differences could be completely different in a tribal community. Marie, what do you think? I mean, this is like your area of expertise. Maybe I think like what I know about women's roles in tribes is like it's more matriarchal, right? Or is that not right?
Well, and then too, like gender rolling in like Western society kind of has like this connotation to it, but in our own tribal communities, that colonial influence kind of plays into it. But no, I know of so many women, at least when we talk about hunting, it's a no-brainer sort of thing. But I haven't heard as much about fishing other than like, oh, I went with, the male members of my family fishing, sort of a thing, and women having a different role within the commercial fisheries, which I know for tribal communities, we have these different things going on, sort of a thing. So, but yeah, no, I was just like, still that ongoing conversation when you were doing your work, and then me reflecting on building my research design on like, oh, that is an interesting thing. How does that show up within our communities if there's a gendering, and how would we, help tease out that cultural influence that way if we're seeing, are we seeing similar age demographics and distributions to, you know, a non-Indigenous, you know, what's going on, or, you know.
Like I wonder if though, like, is it like with the licensed sales data showing that younger women born since 1985 or 1990 are more likely to fish than older generations of women. I think that certainly kind of signals like a generational gender norm shift maybe, but yeah, I wonder if that would show up if you tried to do the same type of study. Yeah, in a tribal community. I don't know. I think that's a really good question. I don't know enough about the cultures to understand that, but I do think too, though, with like, I think the commercial fisheries angle is really cool too. I mean, also it's just one of the reasons I wanted to do this is like, I love the big data stuff, but just the visual of the actions of fishing and you're outside and like, it's not just about the fish and the pictures of beautiful fish, but just the beautiful places and equipment and everything. Like, I didn't have time to show all the pictures. I mean, I have hundreds of pictures that were contributed, but there's one where in that discussion where like what's missing from our images, one of the groups on their first meeting, they're like, what is missing? And one of them was like, oh, like the setup, the gear. And so she went back out and took a picture of like her cooler with like her, it was probably like a bottle of booze and like her pole and her beer and her tackle and like everything. It was like the setup, like when she goes out, like gets amped, gets everything ready to put in the truck. Like it was just kind of cool to have that step where they're like, oh yeah, like I definitely want to document that. And then of course they all started chatting about like, oh yeah, I keep a pole in my trunk, or I keep a pole in the roof of my whatever. And I don't know, it's just kind of cool to see what's the spontaneity that comes from the conversations. I totally got off on a tangent, Marie, sorry. She's used to it. We're good friends.
I do want to chime in with like, oh, I'm sorry. I see Nate was going to be a good host and moderator and chime in with something, and I'm stealing your role, Nate.
Please.
I really appreciated that last question prompt that you put up too, which was if any of us have had, you know, experiences, like gendered experiences in outdoor rec. And so I was just going to offer that I've been learning a lot about woodland stewardship, because for the past couple of years I've been learning about that because I caretake an 80-acre family woodland property in East Central Minnesota. And breaking into that as a woman has been very challenging, because there are definitely a lot of these conceptions of it being like a man's thing to, you know, be like a, you know, anything to do with forestry. And, you know, even if you're like a private landowner, there still is this just constant conception that, you know, it's only the men who care about, you know, how to actually take care of the woods and are out there doing thing in the woods and things like that. And then I have the intersectionality as well of being a, you know, a plus size person, larger body, whatever terminology you want to use for that. So there's sort of those stigma as well of like, well, you're not an active person who would actually recreate in the woods. So, you know, both a woman, and, you know, so a lot of assumptions and stigma there. So that's kind of my experience of, you know, and trying to break into that. And I've just been trying to break into it as a learner, but also there's a lot of resources that you want to like access, and trying to be a private woodland owner who's trying to manage your property. And that's also a man's world, you know, like if you're talking to anybody who actually does timbering, you know, they're men.
You know, you're reminding me of how I first found Photovoice, which was through one of my advisors. She used it when she worked with Iowa women farmland owners, and to document their experiences, and a lot came out of it. They were also working on like some water protection work, I believe, but thinking on like a watershed stewardship scale. But she has done, it's Angie Carter, a lot of work thinking about, how in that case it's women farmland owners, but it's a growing population because women outlive men and often inherit the property. But there's a lot of these like social circles, right? Like, oh, you show up at like the grain silo, I don't know, I'm not a farmer, like the seed bank, whatever, and it's like there's like people yucking it up and you're like, I'm here too. So it's like women farmer networks and things are becoming a thing. I'm just curious, it sounds like you're in Minnesota. Have you heard of the 100 Rural Women group?
Oh, I have, and I went to like one kind of inaugural meeting, or no, it was
Okay.
a meeting sponsored by them, but I haven't kept up with
It
following
might
that.
be a resource for you. I don't know. I haven't kept up with it, but it seems like a nice, I don't think it's specific to like Woodland owner, but it seems like a good group. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you for the reminder, because I've completely forgotten to keep following that initiative. But my day
I
job
stopped
is
following it
actually-
because I was like, are you gonna come to Wisconsin?
Right, exactly.
It's
There's
still
like-
relevant. It's just I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to start a 100 rural women Wisconsin or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much like, cross-border things. The
Yeah.
issues are the same, the landscape the same, so many things. But yeah, we have that arbitrary divide, which is weird. But my day job is doing research in rural health and going out and talking to like rural healthcare providers and things like that. So just kind of like all of these issues around, rural Midwest, and is what really is I guess where I spend my time thinking and doing and trying to create change that will improve health for everyone. And so I think that connection to the outdoors and actually protecting the environment to improve health is a really important component of it. So it all intersects.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I was wondering, and why I'd offered my answer to your prompt was like, I don't think you actually gave your own personal experiences with outdoor recreation and possibly how you've experienced.
Well, yeah, I think for me it's more like in stores, like places where it's like you got to go in and buy something, and you're like, oh, I just don't want to deal with people like treating me like I don't know. And sometimes, and you never know. Sometimes, and that's not to say like that's strictly like me interacting with like an intimidating male outdoor recreation expert or something, because I do think this is where I think of like the most relatable things, where like, say, like I think of my brother, he's intimidated by outdoor recreation. I'm sure that's like go delve into my brother's psyche because he's not here, but like I'm sure it's because of like how overly masculinized, if that's the word, like a lot of these pastimes are. Like even it can be very intimidating. So I think you have to be very persistent, kind of dedicated. Like I think it's a harder hobby to have if you're kind of noticing and picking up on these nuances. Yeah, that's just, I don't know. And I do think it's becoming easier, but like when I see like pink camouflage, I'm like, all right. It's such an oxymoronic like item. You're like, okay, like, yeah, like women are getting into hunting. You're like, but it doesn't have to be pink. Come on. It's just like this kind of funny thing. But yeah, I think I can't think of any like major ones for myself. But probably because I've been more focused on people's experiences. Somebody needs to have a Photovoice project I can participate in. Nate, were you going to say something? Oh, we're probably at time.
Yeah, I mean, so we're at the hour, but that wasn't what I was going to say. It seems like the conversation's going great. So, I mean, I guess for the folks that do want to take off because it's 8 o'clock, feel free. But everybody else, feel free to stay and chat a little bit longer. It sounds like we got some cool stuff going here. I just wanted to share a little bit, give my shot at sort of answering the question. And I've been trying to think about sort of the generational aspect of it myself, which is like, I think about like learning, like my dad is a charter fisherman. So he runs a charter service out on Lake Michigan. And I think about like growing up, like who taught me how to fish and like who I sort of even emulated. And it's really interesting. Like he taught me a bunch of different stuff. And, but also like, learning from my aunt and my grandma who probably loved to fish more than he did when we were growing up is really interesting. But also thinking about like how, from his because my grandfather didn't fish, so he probably learned how to fish from his mom, and then and then him trying to teach it. Like my sister doesn't fish, but my brother fishes, and just thinking about how sort of these things might transfer between generations, and sort of whoever is like taking on that particular craft or skill or whatever for that generation really has a large responsibility, to sort of, I'm just thinking about like sort of you know, like as a male, like what role I might have in terms of like, you know, like creating opportunities potentially or helping, you know, thinking about like passing on the skills I have. And it's like, really, it's like, you know, when I think about it with him, it's really just like, you know, equal opportunities to like teach, you know, to teach all of his kids stuff. And, you know, and I think for him too, I think part of it is like the societal aspect, the societal influence. Like maybe my sister's not even going to be interested, you know, like, and in other things that we've done too, you know, like we grew up hunting and it was like the boys are coming hunting and, you know, I'd have to check with my sister and make sure that, you know, that like, hey, did dad ever even invite you, you know, and maybe he did, I don't know, but it wasn't something that she radiated towards. So it's just interesting to see sort of different generations and sort of how those skills get transferred, because, you know, having those skills like makes it, you know, yes, like going, I also feel sort of intimidated when I go to like an outdoor store, depending on if I'm gonna run into like like super masculine dudes and just be like, all right, you know, I'm this kid from the city. But like, you know, it's interesting to think about that. But even just having those skills makes it just that much more approachable, you know, like you feel just slightly more comfortable to go and do that. And so yeah, just sharing a little bit about my own experience with sort of outdoor rec and stuff like that, and putting that out there. But anyway, yeah, figure I'd get in there. So
I'm so glad you shared that. I was thinking about how to like this, you're talking about something more nuanced, like maybe people just don't have an affinity for it, but that generational difference, the state of Wisconsin, the DNR, a few years back, I don't know if they're still doing this, I bet maybe they are, they established a hunter mentorship program, because they noticed that like, yeah, they identified that like younger hunters, people were interested, but they're like, I don't like, it's pretty intimidating, just like start hunting. It's a lot harder than picking up a fishing pole even. And so they found skilled, generally older, well-experienced hunters and paired them with younger new hunters so they could kind of have that like experience, even though they didn't have, like, if I really wanted to learn to hunt, like I could go talk to my Uncle Joe and be like, all right, Uncle Joe, like I'm ready to learn, take me out. But a lot of people don't have that avenue if they want to try it. So, but that's a very intensive program for recruitment and coordination. So if you're trying to encourage people to get out, it's a little bit harder. The Becoming an Outdoors Woman program is amazing because they can do that in a larger group setting. And then depending on the state, they'll have like smaller, more specialized classes. But again, it's like pretty intensive to run that. I mean, it's essentially like running a mini summer camp every time they have an event. But yeah, it's, and I also think about like how much knowledge is being lost with, say, like skilled baby boomer generation hunters and anglers. Like, to me, that's like heartbreaking that a lot of those stories aren't being captured. Like, I don't ever want to come across as like down with the male hunter, like down with the male angler. Like, those stories should be treasured too. It just happened that for my research, I was like, let's study people who haven't been asked before. Oh, Myra. Yeah, you should totally do a talk, Myra. Myra's research is very cool as well.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, so a couple folks are taking off here. So
Yeah.
I always like to ask the presenters just a little bit, and we got to share a little bit of personal stuff here, but I'm always curious to hear sort of what, or if there is any moment when you realize like, oh, this is what I want to research, this is what I want to do, you know, sort of like a backstory or origin story, you know, like if you were out, you know, walking near a stream one day and you're like, I gotta do this, or, you know, even more general to like how you sort of got into research and into science. And yeah, if there's anything that's, you know, some people have like, this is the moment, and some people are like, I just stumbled into it and I loved it, you know. And so
yeah, that's interesting. I actually I shared with you earlier, like my undergraduate degree was in zoology with kind of an ecology emphasis. So I took years off between all degrees. So it's like kind of exploring what I wanted to do through jobs. And so I was more like a fish, bye Myra, like a fish ecologist but I, for my PhD, went into this social science program, and it was because of an advertisement I saw, like basically like I'm hiring a grad student to do demographic work on Great Lakes anglers. And I had been looking for something that was trying to bridge, but I honestly didn't even know like what the options were in social science. I think I was trying to be an ecologist that would like do a little bit of social science, but then I realized like just dive into the deep end with the big kids. So no big aha moment. Seeing my advisor Angie present about Photovoice, in that moment I was like, this is amazing, I need to do Photovoice. And at the time I had done all the demographic work, and I was really missing out on like talking to people and like doing something more creative, even though it wouldn't necessarily be like my creativity, more community based. And so it seemed like a perfect fit because we were seeing these trends with women, more women are fishing. But when I tried to look up why that may be, there were like there's like no information about that. So it's like, well, there's a gap. So in research, you're like, oh, I found a gap. Maybe I'll try to fill that gap. Like, hurry up before somebody else does it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool to hear that. And
No big epiphany, but just one thing, one step behind the next. I don't know. I don't remember the phrase.
Everyone's story is, slightly different, and yeah, that's really neat, and obviously like a really cool topic and really important, really important to a lot of different people, especially with something that like, I feel like in terms of activities, things like fishing and hunt, like it really, we talked about like sort of the role of gender in this, but like it really defines a lot of people's identities, period.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
what do you do? I'm a fisher person. I'm a fisherman.
Yeah.
This is who I am. And so it's like, it's really interesting to, like start to get into sort of the impact that gender has on opportunities in these, to recreate in this way.
Mhm.
And yeah, really cool work. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Well, so we're about 10 after the hour. If you're up for it, maybe we say anybody has any last questions, you can throw them out there. And if not,
Yeah,
we'll
and I'm happy to, like I shared my email in the chat. Please reach out. Brenna, if you're diving into Photovoice, please let me share a folder of things with you, because I already have like so much collected that I'm like, I'll just share the link. Not that there isn't more to be discovered, but I'm always like, if somebody wants something, I'm like, I have that. Let me share it.
Yeah, that would be super awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's completely new to me, but I'm excited about it. So.
Absolutely. Cool.
And I mean, like I think, like I talked about before, I think it was a great method for this project, but I also want to say, like, I think the research itself is great. Like, it's a great topic and a great idea. And I love that you did it and carried it out and are presenting it. So thank you. It's very thought-provoking.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Erin. Thank you, Brenna. Thank you, Marie. Thank you for everybody else who's come and gone from the conversation at this point. And yeah, really appreciate your time. And I'll give you a clap from my home office here. And wish you the best of luck in your continued research and your continued outreach. And we'll go ahead and share. Yeah, we'll go ahead and share this. We'll share the link to the video. I've got, you put your paper, basically your research out. Love to share that for folks and whatever resources surrounding it. And yeah, just thanks so much again for your time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, this was really fun.
Absolutely. All right. See you later.
Wish we were in person, because then we'd buy you a beer after the presentation there and continue to talk for a while.
Hope in the future, maybe. I don't know what the plan is, Nate, but maybe someday.
Yeah. We hope to. We hope our goal is sort of end of the summer to get stuff back in person again. So
okay,
and it's actually pretty awesome. We've been doing these for about almost over 4 years now, and so like there's actually a pretty cool community of people that come out to the talks, and there's also a really cool community of people that have presented before, and like it's just cool. Different topics, different stuff. So yeah. And Brenna's actually presented in the past, so if we do sort of an alumni.
Oh, great.
Well,
and I really appreciated that you brought the film screening. I'm totally blanking on the movie. I did watch it, but I'm just having a after 8 p.m.
You're
moment.
A scientist.
Yes.
Yeah, that was such a cool event. Yeah, that was a lot of fun too. So yeah, really neat stuff happening, and obviously it all comes down to people that people like you and Brenna and everybody else
Mhm.
that's willing to share their time, and people are coming in and asking good questions. So